The wind was the first to speak that evening, sweeping across the open land like a warning no one could see, but everyone could feel. It rolled over the dry grass, brushed against the wooden fences, and slipped through the cracks of a small frontier homestead standing alone beneath a fading sky. In that wide stretch of old American country, where dusk clung to boots and silence carried farther than voices, trouble never announced itself with noise. It arrived quietly like dusk, and on this night, dusk felt heavier than usual. Inside the cabin, lantern light flickered against rough walls made of timber and sweat. A young woman stood near the window, one hand resting gently on her rounded belly. Her name was Alara Morningfield, and though her hands were soft, her eyes carried the strength of someone who had learned how to survive. She had come to this land with hope in her heart, believing in a simple life filled with peace, children, and steady days. Now, she waited for a different kind of future, one that was growing inside her and changing everything around her. The door opened without a sound. A tall man stepped inside, removing his worn hat and brushing dust from his dark hair. His presence filled the room not with fear, but with quiet steadiness. He was known as Cale Redhawk, a man raised under wide skies and long traditions. His shoulders were broad, his movements calm, and his voice always measured. He carried himself with dignity, not with pride. In a land where many judged him before hearing him, Cale had learned to let his actions speak first. He looked at Alara, and for a moment the world outside seemed to disappear. Their love had not begun in grand speeches or dramatic promises. It had grown slowly, like roots beneath soil, unseen but strong. They had chosen each other, despite whispers, despite stares, despite the uneasy silence that sometimes followed them into town. In this part of the old American frontier, differences were often misunderstood. Yet Cale and Alara had built their home from trust, not from approval. That night, however, something felt different. Cale closed the door behind him and listened. The air carried the faint sound of distant horses, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. He stepped closer to Alara, placing a steady hand near hers, without touching her stomach, respecting the life within. His eyes searched the window as if he could see through the darkness. Alara tried to smile, but her breath felt shorter than usual. She had noticed the riders, too. They had passed the edge of the property earlier that day, slow and watchful. Their presence did not bring comfort. In these lands, strangers rarely traveled without purpose. Sometimes they came seeking work. Sometimes they came seeking land. And sometimes they came seeking conflict. Cale turned back to her and spoke gently. His voice carried warmth, yet there was firmness beneath it. "We don't want any trouble here." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They were not spoken in weakness. They were spoken in protection. Cale had seen what pride and anger could do to families. He had witnessed how quickly misunderstandings could grow into harm. His home, this small cabin, this unborn child, meant more to him than any argument or rivalry ever could. Alara placed her hand over his. She trusted him completely. Her strength was not loud, but it was unwavering. She had chosen this life knowing it would not be easy, believed in kindness, even when others doubted it. Together they had promised to raise their child with both courage and compassion. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the shutters. Shadow moved beyond the fence line. Cale noticed immediately. Years of living close to the land had sharpened his senses. He did not reach for a weapon. Instead, he stepped closer to the door and listened carefully. He hoped the riders were simply passing through, guided by travel or trade. Yet the silence that followed felt deliberate. Alara sat down slowly, trying to steady herself. She could feel the tension in the room. The baby within her shifted as if responding to her heartbeat. Not out of fear, but out of hope. Cale walked to the window and looked into the darkness. For a moment, he remembered the early days when he and Alara had first decided to build their home on this land. They had faced doubt from neighbors, suspicion from travelers, and long conversations filled with misunderstanding. Yet they had continued forward, determined to create something better. Their dream had always been simple: a peaceful life, a safe home, a future child growing in freedom. The distant sound of horses grew clearer. Cale's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with responsibility. He knew that sometimes peace required strength. He also knew that words alone could not always protect a family. Still, he hoped for dialogue rather than conflict. He believed that respect could open doors where fear only built walls. A knock suddenly echoed through the night. It was not loud, but it was firm enough to demand attention. Alara held her breath. Cale did not move immediately. The knock came again, steady and deliberate. He glanced back at Alara, offering a reassuring nod. His expression remained calm, but his eyes reflected readiness. Whatever waited outside would not find panic within this home. Only unity. Cale opened the door slowly. Moonlight revealed 3 riders standing at the edge of the yard. Their faces were unreadable in the dim glow. Dust clung to their boots, and their horses shifted uneasily. The leader of the group removed his hat, his tone controlled but firm. He spoke of boundaries, of land, of concerns shared by others beyond the horizon. Cale listened without interruption. Alara remained inside, watching through the open doorway, her heart steady despite the uncertainty. She knew this moment would shape their future. She could feel it in the air, thick with possibility and risk. The conversation outside remained low and tense. No threats were shouted. No insults were exchanged. Yet beneath the politeness, something unspoken lingered. Expectations, demands, fear of the unknown. Cale kept his voice even as he responded. He repeated the same principle he had shared with Alara earlier. They did not want trouble here. They wanted peace. They wanted to raise their child without hostility surrounding their door. The riders exchanged glances. One of them looked toward the cabin window where Alara stood. For a brief moment their eyes met. The rider's expression softened slightly, as if realizing this was not merely a dispute over land, it was a home, family, a future. Yet not all tensions dissolve easily. The leader tightened his grip on the reins, clearly weighing his next words. The wind returned, sweeping between them like a restless witness. Inside the cabin, the lantern flickered again. Cale stepped forward just enough to stand between the riders and the doorway, not as a challenge, but as protection. Alara placed both hands over her belly, silently hoping that this night would end in understanding rather than division. The riders had not yet decided whether to stay or leave, and as the moon climbed higher above the frontier sky, the silence between them felt like the edge of something far greater. Waiting to unfold, the riders remained at the edge of the yard, while the night settled deeper around them. Cale Redhawk stood firm, his posture calm but alert. He did not raise his voice, yet every word he spoke carried quiet authority. He had learned long ago that true strength does not need noise, it only needs clarity. Alara Morningfield watched from the doorway, feeling both pride and worry rise inside her. The land around them seemed endless, but in moments like this, it felt very small. Before the riders came, life on the frontier had followed a steady rhythm. Cale spent his mornings repairing fences, checking the water trough, and walking the perimeter of their land. He respected the soil beneath his feet, understood the seasons, the dry summers, and the cold winds that tested every structure. Alara often worked beside him, tending a small garden and keeping their cabin warm and clean. Their days were simple, yet full of meaning. They spoke about the future often, about the child they expected, and about the kind of home they wanted to build. Their love story had grown quietly in a place where many expected division. Cale had once been cautious about trusting outsiders. He had experienced judgment in nearby towns, where people stared at him longer than necessary. Yet Alara never looked at him with doubt. She saw his patience, his honesty, and the gentleness he carried beneath his steady voice. She believed in him, and that belief had changed both of their lives. Alara had also faced her own challenges. Some neighbors whispered when they saw her with Cale. Others questioned her choices, but she never allowed those voices to shape her heart. She chose love because she valued character over appearance. In her eyes, Cale was not defined by background or labels. He was defined by how he treated her, how he listened, and how carefully he planned for their future child. The land itself had become part of their bond. They often sat outside in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm colors. Cale would speak about traditions passed down from his family, stories of resilience and respect for nature. Alara would share her dreams of raising their child with kindness and courage. Together they imagined teaching their son or daughter to walk with confidence, to speak with honesty, and to understand both history and hope. But the arrival of the riders shifted the air around them. Cale had noticed the tension in the region growing over recent months. New settlers were moving in, and with them came disagreements about territory and resources. Some believed the land should be divided differently. Others felt threatened by change. Conversations in town had grown louder, and meetings often ended without agreement. Cale had tried to remain neutral in public discussions. He believed that cooperation was possible, yet he knew that misunderstandings could spread quickly, especially in places where fear influenced decisions. That is why he had told Alara that they did not want trouble, not because they were afraid, but because they valued peace above pride. Alara stepped further into the doorway, holding onto the frame for balance. Her pregnancy made every movement slower, but it also made her more aware of the world around her. She felt responsible not only for herself, but for the life growing within her. That responsibility strengthened her resolve. She would not allow conflict to define her child's first memories, even before birth. Outside, the leader of the riders spoke again. His tone remained controlled, yet firm. He mentioned concerns shared by others in the area. He spoke of boundaries and expectations. Cale listened carefully, making sure he understood every detail. He did not interrupt. He believed that listening was the first step toward clarity. The other riders remained silent, their expressions difficult to read under the moonlight. Their horses shifted slightly, creating soft sounds against the dirt. The scene felt suspended in time, as though the entire frontier was waiting to see what would happen next. Cale finally responded with steady words. He explained that this land was their home, spoke about the cabin they built together, the garden they planted, and the plans they had for the coming season. He emphasized that they wished to live peacefully, to cooperate when possible, and to avoid unnecessary disputes. His voice carried sincerity rather than defiance. Alara felt a surge of emotion as she listened. She admired how he remained composed under pressure. His strength was not aggressive, it was protective. It came from love, not anger. She realized once again why she had chosen him as her partner. He stood between her and uncertainty without hesitation. Still, the riders did not leave. The conversation continued in measured tones. They asked questions about landmarkers and previous agreements. Cale answered honestly, explaining how they had understood the boundaries when they settled there. He offered to review any documents or speak with community leaders if needed. Despite the respectful exchange, the atmosphere remained tense. Neither side raised their voice, yet the underlying disagreement remained unresolved. It was clear that this meeting would not end quickly. Alara moved a chair closer to the doorway and sat down, wanting to stay near Cale while giving him space to speak. She rested one hand on her stomach, feeling the steady movement of the child inside. She whispered a soft promise that she and Cale would face whatever came together. Cale glanced back at her briefly, and their eyes met. That single look carried reassurance, commitment, and love. It reminded both of them why they had chosen this life despite challenges. Their partnership was not built on convenience. It was built on loyalty and shared dreams. The riders exchanged quiet words among themselves. One of them looked toward the horizon, where more land stretched into darkness. The night air felt cooler now, and the wind carried distant sounds from the open plains. Nothing had been decided yet. No agreements were finalized. No conflicts were resolved. Cale maintained his calm stance. He knew that patience was essential. Decisions made in anger could damage more than land. They could damage relationships and trust. He wanted understanding, not division. Alara wanted the same, though she knew that the path toward peace was rarely simple. As the conversation slowed, a new silence settled between them. It was not a peaceful silence, but a thoughtful one. Each side seemed to consider what had been said, yet uncertainty remained, hovering like the night sky above them. Inside the cabin, the lantern flickered once more. Alara looked at the small room around her, imagining how quickly life could change. She thought about the child she carried and the world waiting beyond these walls. She wondered what kind of future would greet them in the morning. Cale remained outside with the riders, his presence steady and composed. The outcome of this meeting was still unknown. The land, the home, and their growing family stood at the center of a conversation that had only just begun. The night held its breath, and the frontier waited for what would come next. The riders did not leave after the long discussion. Instead, They stayed near the fence line, speaking in low voices while their horses shifted under the moonlight. Cale Redhawk could feel that this was no ordinary visit. It was not just about land boundaries anymore. There was something deeper behind their questions, something that had not yet been fully spoken. Inside the cabin, Ilara Morningfield tried to stay calm, but her heart would not slow down. She trusted Cale, yet she also understood how quickly misunderstandings could grow in this frontier land. She had heard stories in town about disputes turning into long feuds, about neighbors becoming strangers. The old American countryside could be beautiful, but it could also be unforgiving. She did not want her child to be born into fear or hostility. Cale stood with the riders as they finally began to explain more clearly. They mentioned pressure from nearby settlers who believed the land should be reorganized for expansion. They spoke of meetings held in town halls where decisions were being discussed without everyone present. Cale realized then that this visit might be connected to politics rather than personal conflict. Still, the outcome could affect their home in serious ways. One of the riders, a younger man named Dorian Hale, seemed less certain than the others. He avoided direct eye contact and often glanced toward the cabin. His expression suggested doubt rather than anger. Cale noticed this detail carefully and learned to read people by their silence. Dorian's hesitation hinted that not everyone in the group fully agreed with their mission. Cale asked a few careful questions. He wanted clarity, not confrontation. The leader of the riders responded with controlled patience, explaining that new agreements might require adjustments to property lines. He did not threaten, but his words carried implication. Cale understood that if such changes moved forward, families like his could be forced to reconsider their place on the land. That thought tightened Cale's jaw, though he kept his tone respectful. He reminded them that he and Ilara had invested their labor, their savings, and their future into this property. The cabin, the garden, and the small barn were built with determination. This was not just land to them, it was their life. It was where their child would take first steps and learn the value of hard work. As the conversation continued, Ilara stepped outside slowly. She did not want to hide behind walls while her husband faced uncertainty alone. Her presence changed the atmosphere slightly. She stood beside Cale, placing a gentle hand near his arm. Her calm strength reminded everyone that this was not just about territory. It was about a family preparing for new life. The riders noticed her pregnancy, and for a brief moment, the tension softened. Even the leader seemed to pause. The sight of an expecting mother in the quiet frontier carried emotional weight. It reminded them that decisions made in distant meetings could affect real homes and real futures. Still, the underlying issue remained unresolved. The land dispute was not personal, but it was serious. If boundaries were redrawn, their home could fall under new jurisdiction. That possibility meant uncertainty. And uncertainty can feel like a storm before it arrives. Ilara spoke carefully, her voice gentle but steady. She explained that she and Cale wanted cooperation. They were willing to attend community discussions and share their perspective. She emphasized that they valued peaceful resolution and mutual respect. Her words carried sincerity, and even the riders listened closely. Dorian finally spoke up, saying that not everyone agreed with the proposed changes. He admitted that some believed the expansion plans were rushed. His voice revealed internal conflict within the group. This was not a united decision. There were differences even among them. The detail added another layer to the situation. Cale realized that the real challenge might not be the riders themselves, but the larger system influencing them. Policies were being discussed without full understanding of how families would be affected. He felt a responsibility to stay informed and involved. Remaining silent would not protect his home. Participation might be necessary, even if it brought discomfort. Meanwhile, Ilara noticed something else. The riders seemed exhausted, as though they had traveled long distances. Their journey may not have been intended as intimidation. It could have been an attempt to communicate concerns directly. This perspective shifted her understanding slightly, though it did not remove the tension. The night grew colder, and the wind moved across the open fields. Cale invited the riders to rest briefly near the edge of the property. He offered water and a simple place to sit. This gesture surprised them, but it also demonstrated goodwill. Cale believed that leadership begins with hospitality, not hostility. As they rested, more details emerged. There had been disagreements in town between different groups of settlers. Some wanted rapid development, while others preferred slower growth. The riders were part of a delegation sent to gather information. Their visit was not meant to finalize decisions, but to observe and report back. This revelation deepened the complexity of the story. The conflict was not just between individuals. It involved community planning, land rights, and future expansion. Each side had reasons shaped by survival and opportunity. The frontier was changing, and change often brings uncertainty. Elara listened carefully to every word. She felt both relieved and concerned. Relieved that there was no immediate threat, but concerned that future meetings might bring stronger challenges. She held Kale's hand as they considered what this could mean for their growing family. Kale understood that this moment was only the beginning. The conversation had opened doors, but it had not closed any concerns. Decisions were still pending. Meetings would continue, and the fate of their land remained undecided. He looked at Elara again, noticing the determination in her eyes. She was not afraid of hard work or difficult conversations. She wanted stability for their child, but she also valued fairness. Together they realized that their next steps would require courage, patience, and unity. The riders prepared to leave after some time, promising to share what they had learned. Yet they did not guarantee outcomes. The future of the property was still uncertain. The tension in the air remained, even as hoofbeats faded into the distance. Kale and Elara stood in silence, watching the riders disappear into the dark horizon. The land around them felt both familiar and fragile. Their love remained strong, but the external pressures had grown more visible. Inside the cabin, the lantern glowed softly as they returned indoors. The night was not over, and the conflict had not ended. More discussions would come. More voices would be heard. The frontier was shifting, and they were standing at the center of it. As Elara rested in Kale's arms, both of them knew that tomorrow would bring new questions. The future of their home, their community ties, and their family still hung in uncertainty. Somewhere beyond the horizon, decisions were being shaped that could change everything they had built together. The nights that followed were restless. The wind carried whispers of distant voices, of travelers passing through, of debates in town that seemed louder when they reached the edges of Kale, Red Hawk, and Elara Morningfield's homestead. Each day brought new signs that the balance they had worked so hard to maintain was fragile. Rumors of disagreements in town halls, of neighbors considering claims on lands, reached them like echoes bouncing off the endless plains. The cabin, once a place of quiet comfort, now felt like a small fortress guarding their future. Kale spent hours pacing the perimeter, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Every ridge of land, every fence post, every tree marker was observed and memorized. He knew the land like the lines on his own palms, but that knowledge offered no certainty against human intentions. He thought of the riders who had come before their questions, polite yet probing, their eyes hiding unspoken judgments. Kale had sensed that some among them might genuinely care about fairness, while others were swept by pride or fear. Sorting truth from assumption had become an exhausting task. Inside, Elara worked tirelessly to maintain the home. Her hands grew calloused from preparing the garden for the next season, for weaving fresh linens, and for repairing small damages the wind or rain had left behind. Moved slowly, mindful of the child growing within her, but her determination did not waver. Every small task became a statement that this home belonged to them, and they would protect it. She often paused near the window, her eyes scanning the horizon for movement, for any sign that the world beyond their cabin could spill into their carefully built peace. One evening, Kale returned from a walk around the land, his expression tense. He had spoken with a messenger from town, a man named Corbin Thorne, who carried letters filled with questions and subtle warnings. Corbin's tone was civil, yet Kale sensed underlying pressure. The town's authorities were divided, some supporting change, others urging caution. Each word carried weight, and each silence between the lines hinted at deeper conflict. Kale realized that the next confrontation would require both wisdom and courage, perhaps more than he or Elara had yet exercised. Elara greeted him at the doorway, her hand resting lightly on her belly. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with concern. Kale shook his head. "He spoke carefully, but it's clear that some in town want us to choose between our home and their plans. They don't know us. They don't understand what we've built." He paused, taking her hand in his. "But they will find out if we show them who we are." Her eyes softened, but the tension in the air was palpable. She knew he was right. their love, their home, their family. These were things that had grown slowly, nurtured with trust and patience. Now they were threatened by forces beyond their control. Now, the child they awaited, the life they envisioned, depended on both courage and unity. The following days were filled with preparation. Cale worked alongside Alara to reinforce the fences and repair the barn roof, but his mind was never fully on the tasks. He considered strategies, anticipated questions, and imagined possible confrontations. Alara, too, prepared in her way. She gathered provisions, ensured the garden could withstand any short-term hardship, and kept the cabin orderly. Each act of preparation was more than practicality. It was a silent declaration that they would endure, no matter what came. Tension thickened further when a rider returned, alone this time. His arrival at dusk brought unease, for he carried no immediate threats, yet his presence spoke volumes. His name was Rylan Voss, and he brought news of debates in town escalating. Some settlers were pushing for quick decisions on land redistribution. Others warned of possible disputes turning into property disputes or worse. Cale listened carefully, noting every phrase, while Alara silently observed from the doorway, her heartbeat steady yet anxious. "You have to understand," Rylan said, his voice low and controlled. "Not everyone is against you. But there are people who don't want anyone in town who isn't willing to bend to their plans." Cale's gaze sharpened. "We bend for nothing that threatens our family. Our home is ours to protect." Rylan hesitated. "There are risks. They might try to challenge you directly, with more than words. You should be prepared." Alara stepped closer to Cale, placing her hand over his arm. "We've faced challenges before," she said quietly. "We will face this one too, together." Rylan's eyes flickered with respect. "You're stronger than most, but strength alone may not be enough." He handed Cale a folded letter from Town Hall, sealed with wax. "Read it. Decide how you respond. The next council meeting will determine much of what happens here." As Rylan left, the cabin felt heavier. Cale and Alara unfolded the letter together. It contained formal requests, implied ultimatums, and suggestions of potential penalties if land disputes were not resolved to the council's satisfaction. The words themselves were measured, but the meaning behind them carried threat. Their peaceful life now rested on navigating these tensions carefully, without losing sight of what mattered most: their love, their home, their unborn child. Days turned into nights filled with uneasy anticipation. Cale and Alara rarely slept in full. The wind howled across the plains, echoing the uncertainty they felt. Occasionally they would step outside, standing together in the open air, hands entwined, silently sharing strength. Sometimes the distant silhouettes of riders appeared on the horizon. Cale would watch them, noting details: the way they moved, the way their horses responded, even the angle of their gaze. Each sign could be an omen or nothing at all. One night, as the full moon cast silver light over the land, a figure approached from the ridge. It was not a rider, but a stranger on foot, moving cautiously, carrying a small bundle. Cale and Alara watched from the cabin doorway, the tension in the air stretching taut. The stranger stopped near the fence, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Calen Dusk," he said, voice low but clear. "I come with information. I know what's happening in town, and I know what could befall your home if things continue unchecked." Cale studied him carefully. Trust came slowly in these lands, but Kellen's eyes were honest. He seemed weary, yet determined. Alara placed a hand over her heart. "What is it?" she asked. Calen hesitated, glancing briefly at the dark horizon. "There are people who wish to take more than land. They see this place as theirs by influence, not by right. They may push the council to act unfairly. I wanted to warn you before it's too late." The cabin seemed to shrink around them, filled with the weight of this knowledge. Cale clenched his fists, but remained composed. He knew the next days would demand everything: careful strategy, resilience, and courage. He and Alara were no longer simply defending their home against uncertainty. They were confronting forces that could shape not just their lives, but the life of their unborn child. Alara's hand rested lightly on her belly. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "We will endure. We must endure." Calen nodded. "I wanted to help, but you must act wisely. The council meets soon, and decisions will be made quickly." What you do in the next moments could change everything, Kale. Exchanged a long look with Alara. Their eyes spoke the words that no one else could understand. Together, they would face whatever came. Their love, their home, their family. They would protect it, even if it meant standing against powerful voices. The night deepened, and the wind carried distant echoes of the town far beyond the hills. Kale, Alara, and Kalen remained in the cabin, plotting, preparing, and bracing themselves. Outside, shadows seemed to stretch longer, as if waiting for the confrontation that was inevitable. The tension hung so thick in the air that even the moonlight seemed uncertain, casting strange shapes across the land. Every creak of timber, every rustle of grass, every sound beyond the fence reminded them of what was at stake. The life they had built together, the peace they longed to maintain, and the child they awaited depended on the choices they would make in the hours ahead. The climax of their struggle was near, but the outcome remained a question, hidden just beyond reach. Alara and Kale sat side by side, hands intertwined, eyes toward the horizon. The wind carried the unspoken promise that love and courage could face any challenge. Yet the trial they were about to meet would test them as never before. The night held its breath, and the frontier waited. The storm of human intention, pride, and fear was gathering, and the moment of confrontation, of truth, was approaching with unstoppable force. The tension was at its peak, and the story of Kale and Alara teetered on the edge, ready to tip into its most defining moment. The next morning arrived with a pale, steady light that spread slowly across the frontier land. The wind was calmer than before, as if the night had spent all its energy in warning and had nothing left to threaten. Kale Redhawk stood outside the cabin with Alara Morningfield beside him, both of them watching the road that led toward town. Today was the council meeting. Today would decide whether their homestead would remain safe or be drawn into conflict. Kale had not slept much, but his mind was clear, felt no anger, only focus. Alara rested one hand on her belly and the other in his palm. Their love felt stronger after everything they had endured. The tension had tested them, yet it had also revealed how deeply they trusted each other. In the quiet morning air, they made a simple promise without speaking it aloud. Whatever happened, they would stand together. Before leaving, Kalen Dusk returned briefly, confirming that several voices in town were already questioning the proposed land changes. He explained that many families feared losing their homes if decisions were rushed. The council meeting would allow different sides to speak. That news brought relief, but it also meant the outcome was still uncertain. Kale nodded with gratitude. He understood that fairness required patience, and patience required courage. When Kale and Alara reached town, they felt the familiar mix of eyes turning toward them. Some people watched with curiosity, others with hesitation. Yet something had changed since the riders first appeared. Rumors had traveled quickly about their respectful conversations, about their willingness to listen. Respect begins quietly, but it spreads when shown consistently. Inside the council hall, the room was filled with settlers, landowners, and local representatives. The atmosphere was serious but not hostile. Kale felt Alara squeeze his hand before they sat down. Her presence gave him strength. The meeting began with formal discussions about development plans and community growth. Several speakers shared their views. Some argued for rapid expansion, believing progress would bring opportunity. Others urged caution, explaining how sudden changes could disrupt families who had already built lives on their land. When it was Kale's turn to speak, he stood calmly. He did not accuse anyone. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he described their journey, their hard work, and the home they had built with care. He spoke about the garden, the barn, and the future they imagined for their child. His words were simple, yet sincere. He reminded the council that growth should never come at the cost of stability for families already contributing to the community. Alara then stepped forward. Though the room was large, her voice carried clearly. She spoke about unity and shared responsibility. She explained that they were willing to participate in community planning and discussions. She emphasized that peace and cooperation would strengthen the region more than division ever could. Her calm confidence touched many in the room. People listened carefully, realizing that this was not about resistance, but about fairness. Dorian Hale, who had traveled with the earlier riders, stood as well. He admitted that he had concerns when first assigned to visit Kale and Ilar's home. But after seeing their dedication and hearing their perspective, he believed that decisions should be made with full understanding. His honesty surprised some members of the council, and it shifted the direction of the conversation. The debates continued for hours. Questions were asked, documents were reviewed, boundaries were discussed in detail. Through it all, Cale remained composed, and Alara stayed steady by his side. The strength of their partnership became evident to everyone present. They were not seeking advantage, they were seeking stability. Finally, after careful review, the council reached a decision. The proposed land changes would be paused until further evaluation could ensure that no family would be displaced unfairly. A committee would be formed to include representatives from different groups, allowing transparent discussion and balanced planning. The decision was not dramatic, but it was thoughtful, reflected cooperation rather than conflict. When the announcement was made, a wave of relief passed through the room. Cale exhaled slowly. Alara felt tears of gratitude gather in her eyes. Their home would remain secure, and their voices would continue to be part of future discussions. The immediate tension had been resolved through communication rather than confrontation. After the meeting ended, several townspeople approached them. Some apologized for assumptions they had made. Others expressed appreciation for their respectful stance. Even some who had supported rapid expansion acknowledged the importance of listening to all families. The atmosphere in town felt different now, lighter and more open. Kalen Dusk met them outside and smiled warmly. He said that their courage in speaking up had made a difference. Cale thanked him sincerely, recognizing that timely information had helped them prepare. Without it, the outcome might have been very different. Subplots that once seemed separate had come together in this moment of understanding. As evening approached, Cale and Alara returned home. The land looked peaceful under the setting sun. Fences stood firm, the garden was intact, and the cabin felt welcoming once again. The tension that had hovered over the property was gone, replaced by calm certainty. They stood together outside their door, watching the horizon glow with soft colors. Cale placed his hands gently around Alara's shoulders. Their journey had strengthened their bond. They had faced uncertainty, political debate, community pressure, and fear, yet they had done so with dignity. Their love had guided every decision. Alara spoke quietly, saying that their child would grow up in a home shaped by resilience and respect. Cale agreed. He believed the lessons of this experience would teach their family about courage, patience, and cooperation. The frontier was not only about land, it was about people learning to live together. In the days that followed, the committee began its work. Cale participated actively, ensuring that communication remained open. Alara attended meetings when she could, representing families and encouraging fair dialogue. The town slowly developed stronger trust between neighbors. The conflict that once threatened their home became the foundation for better understanding. The story that began with tension ended with unity. There were no winners or losers, only a community learning to listen. Cale and Alara's romantic bond remained at the heart of everything. Their love had not only protected their home, but it also inspired others to choose conversation over conflict. As their child continued to grow, the cabin filled with hope. The frontier land, once shadowed by uncertainty, now felt like a place of opportunity. Cale often reflected on how a simple statement about not wanting trouble had turned into a journey toward peace. It reminded him that strength and gentleness can exist together. Alara would later tell their child that courage is not about fighting, it is about standing firm in truth, speaking with respect, and protecting what matters most. Their home became a symbol of harmony in the old American-style setting they loved so deeply. In the end, the story closed, not with noise, but with calm. The land remained theirs. The community grew wiser. The family that had once stood at the edge of uncertainty now stood at the center of hope. Their journey proved that love, when guided by patience and integrity, can turn even the most intense conflict into a lasting happy ending. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and gives us the courage to create even more exciting stories.